So what you'll do is you'll just put these squares right sides together. And if you just wanted to make a plain, like you can use a nice decorated piece like we did with this hand applique chuck, or you can use just a plain piece. So you'll take these two squares and put them right sides together. And once you have them lined up, you're just going to take it to your machine, and you're going to want to sew a 1/2 inch seam, and that 1/2 inch seam should be on the side that's closest to the top of your applique, because that's going to be the top of that pocket, and that is the side that you want to have a clean finish on it. So I'm going to go ahead and sew, and I'm going to take a few inches of a few stitches, and then I'm going to back stitch. And we're back stitching because I want to have this nice and secure and be able to trim these edges off without having to bury any thread. And once we get to the other end, we're going to take a few back stitches again. And then we'll just trim off these thread tails. And then when you open this up, you'll press this seam open. And then press that open. I'll meet you back here and show you what to do next. Okay, so now that our seam is pressed open, it should be pretty easy for us to fold that over. And we're just going to fold it over so that we have a nice fold here. And we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam this time. And the 1/4 inch seam is nice because it'll catch that seam allowance for the 1/2 inch seam and make our pocket a little bit more secure. And you also have a nice clean finish on the inside of this pocket. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a few stitches, then I'll back stitch a little bit, and then finish to the end. And when I do get to the end, I'm going to take a few back stitches again. Trim those thread tails. And now this pocket is going to be ready to put on to our canvas bag. And I'll show you what we're going to do to deal with these raw edges here. And it's a super easy way to do it. Okay, so now that we have the pocket made, we're going to need to attach it to our canvas bag. So the first thing I'm going to do is center that pocket on my canvas bag. And once I have it centered the way I want it, I'm going to use some painter's tape to hold that in place for me to stitch it down. Now, painter's tape is low tack, so it's not going to damage the fabric, but it will hold it down for you while you stitch it. So I'm just going to put some painter's tape on the sides and the bottom of the pocket to hold that in place while I stitch it down. And then once you get close to the painter's tape, you can just start peeling it back so it won't be in your way while you stitch. And we're not going to stitch this top part down because otherwise we wouldn't be able to use the pocket. But I am going to go ahead and put some painter's tape at the top part just so that that holds that down a little more securely. And then you'll just take it to your sewing machine, and you'll want to use your sewing machine's free arm here. And we'll sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance from top to bottom on this side. And you'll do the back stitches at the beginning and at the end, just like we did while we were making this part. And then you'll go from side to side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this bottom side. And then top to bottom on this other side. And like I said, back stitch at the beginning and end of all of your stitch lines, just like we did with this one. And once that's done, you'll trim your threads off. So after you sew those 1/2 inch seam allowances along the bottom and both sides of the pocket, your pocket will be attached. And what you're going to do now is we're going to cut this like a rag quilt. So we're going to I've got my spring-loaded scissors here. They just kind of really save your wrist. And we're just going to get this and we're going to cut about an 1/8 inch. I like to stay about an 1/8 inch away from the seam line. You don't want to cut through that seam line. And we'll just snip those. And we're going to make cuts. I like to go about a 1/4 inch apart or so. And you'll just keep doing that, making those cuts all along that pocket. And it's going to kind of have a rag quilt effect on the edges of that pocket. So, depending on the size of your machine, free arms can be kind of difficult to work with, especially when you're sewing on like a bag like this. So if, because you were dealing with that, your stitch line got a little crooked or a little wavy, that's not a big deal, because once we snip this, that fray will hide that messy stitch line. And so you'll end up with basically a really easy project that's really forgiving. And another tip, if your machine is smaller, just know that the smaller your pocket is in relation to the bag you're sewing it on, and the higher up you put your pocket, the easier that's going to be to work with. So I used 10-inch squares in this project because I wanted to use those pretty prints from the Quilt Town layer cake. But you know, you can always make it smaller. You just want your pocket to be big enough for whatever design you're appliquing on there, if you're reverse appliquing it, or you're just making a plain pocket. Just you know, a smaller pocket in relation to the size of the bag is just going to be a lot easier to work with, especially if you have a smaller machine that doesn't have a huge free arm. So now that we have both pockets on our bag, and they are the little fray part, the part that I want to fray is cut, we can go ahead and wash this to make that fray. And like I said earlier, attaching a pocket this big when you have to use your free arm is actually kind of hard to do. So you could either make the pocket smaller, or if you do get a little bit, you know, wonky with your stitch lines because of that, it's going to be okay. This technique is really forgiving. Once we wash this and it starts to fray, that's going to hide that. So you're going to wash it according to the instructions of your fabric. Cotton is pretty easy to wash, but since the bag is canvas, I'm going to wash this on gentle cycle and cold. And I am going to put it in the dryer with either low heat or no heat, just because I want the dryer to agitate this fringe here to make it fray pretty. Okay, so here she is all finished. You can see we've got some pretty fringe here, functional pocket. Let's check the other side. Same thing, pretty fringe, functional pocket.